Eventually, women also took over the nursing profession. More and more women chose to work outside the home. In some cases, there was a shortage of men and women were hired. Eventually, women became secretaries, clerks, and typists. They were still hired as domestics. Now, if you watch a movie that was made in the 1920s, you might notice that the secretaries were men still. Most secretaries at that time were men. There was a story going around once that Abraham Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy, but we searched and searched the records. He didn't. All of Abraham Lincoln's secretaries were male. Again, the secretaries kept the records. It was found out that generally women made better typists than men. So women then became more and more. Also, in time of war, both world wars, in time of war, when the men went off to join the army, the women began to do more and more of the work that men did. And when there was a shortage of men, women often were hired. Now, women were generally paid less than the men, and they were not promoted as fast as the men. This was to remain true for generations, and in a lot of cases it still is true. Now then there came a move to give women the right to vote. The first nation to give women the right to vote was Norway. World War I did a lot to promote women, particularly because the war lasted so long in Europe. And so many men were killed on the front lines. So many men were killed that the women had to take over and run the factories. And when World War I ended, more and more nations gave women the right to vote, including the United States. Women voted for the first time in the United States in 1920, just after World War I ended. Now, again, folks, I wish you could hear my 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Conley by name, talk about women voting. Yes, she was a woman and she was against it. And I don't know if Mrs. Conley is still alive. I mean, I have no way to really find that out. She never taught again after she taught our class. But she said that women lost a whole lot when they got the right to vote. The first thing that the women did in our country, the United States, instead of getting involved in politics, they started dressing more skimpily, exposing more of their bodies, smoking cigarettes, becoming dance girls called flappers. And today, moving on, in a lot of cases, it appears that the men and women don't even like each other. I like women. I'm the father of 2 daughters. My wife and I have been together 31 years come September. Yes, I got married late. But I feel sorry for people today who are unmarried and hope to get married. I'll quit there. If anyone wants to comment, your comments are welcome. Until 1992, women in the United States, either they voted 50-50 for each candidate, or their numbers, they voted, like if the men voted 60% for one candidate, women voted for 60% for that candidate. The first candidate that women are believed to have elected was William Jefferson, Bill Clinton. William Jefferson, you might call him Bill Clinton. The first candidate women actually are believed to have elected. All right, I'll leave that. All right. Karl Marx. Let's see. Dickens, Swan, Ford, assembly line. All right. Actually, before we get to Karl Marx, I must mention someone, particularly after talking about women. The most famous female scientist of all time was Madame Curie. She and her husband worked with radon and uranium. They studied radiation. And her work eventually, without her realizing, eventually led to the development of the nuclear reactor and even the atomic bomb. She did not know the dangers of it, and she died of leukemia. She continuously exposed herself to the radiations that uranium gives off, but she did a lot of work on uranium. Uranium is unique among the elements in that it is the heaviest of the elements that will hold itself together, but it's not that stable, and it's continually changing from uranium to lead. And again, the radiation killed her earlier than she otherwise might have been. But her work led indirectly, or maybe we might say directly, led to the development of the nuclear reactor, which is used on submarines, used to supply us with electricity. Nuclear reactor. All right. This takes us up to Karl Marx. Karl Marx believed that the workers of the world should unite. Now, on a personal note, he never met a worker. He really perhaps didn't know what he was talking about, but he believed that the workers were the exploited, the downtrodden. He was really upset to see female workers work the mines and pull carts in the mines, work that was really dirty and dark and strenuous, physically strenuous. Well, the revolution of 1848, he watched them hoping this is going to be the overturn. He believed that all government should be overturned, that all kings and nobles should be basically destroyed, and we should form a society that did not have any government anymore. So, when the revolutions of 1848 failed, he and his friend Engels fled to England where there was no revolution, and there he wrote a book called The Communist Manifesto. Communist Manifesto, in which he advocated the overthrow of all social classes. Now, he said all history is a class struggle. Struggle between the plebes in Roman time, the patrician and plebes in Roman times. Struggle between labor and management in modern times. Struggles between the nobility and the peasants. And in between times, he said all history is nothing more than a class struggle, a struggle of one class trying to control and manipulate the other. And his view had an appeal. He believed that when the masses overthrew, he was the first person we know of to use the term masses. By the way, let me interject here. There are only individuals, folk. There are no masses. The masses do not exist. We're all individuals. Nevertheless, when you start talking about communism, you come across the masses, proletariat, that was another word for the establishment. He believed that the masses would rise up someday and overthrow the proletariat. When this happened, a heaven on earth would result. Wars would cease. Well, he believed that the communist revolution was inevitable, and this, folk, makes his belief a religion. Only religions teach the inevitability of something. He believed that it was doomed to happen, going to happen, and the best thing each of us could do was join in and side with the laborers, the masses, to overthrow the established order and bring about this communist heaven. Now, he also believed that the first country that would revolt would be England. And there have been many a book written on why this didn't happen, but he believed that England would become the first communistic state because England, he said, was more advanced than the others, and again, communism was an advancement to the next high level of existence. I mean, it started out to him, royalty was the worst, then democracy was the next one up, and then democracy would lead the way toward communism. And when that happened, peace on earth would result, heaven on earth was all. Under communism, everybody would work. There'd be no unemployed. And everybody would be fed. His manifesto was from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Take from everybody what he produces, and then redistribute it evenly to give it to each person what that person needs. All right, let me follow. Communism doesn't seem to be as important today as it was when I was younger. I mean, when I was in school, the Cold War was still going on. And yes, I had a communistic professor. I mean, he was openly communist, Paul Pinckney by name, at University of Tennessee. Does anybody have any comments? I mean, any thoughts on this? I mean, this changed the world. I mean, there was a book written, 7 Men Who Control the World from Their Grave. Charles Darwin is one of them. Karl Marx is another one. Sigmund Freud, we'll talk about in a little bit, is another one. Will communism bring about a heaven on earth? Now, to me, the best example of true communism in action, I said this the first day of class, the best example of true communism in action is the North American Indians. At the time the Europeans arrived, they had no money, no social classes. Everybody was equal. And they wound up getting blown away, being driven out of their land. You can tell me all you want to that it was wrong, but the other side of it is this is simply what happens to people who do not excel and advance. Anybody? I did not listen to the debates last night, but I listened to the news about them this morning way in. I mean, it takes me almost 2 hours to get from my house to here in the mornings. So, and I always make sure I arrive before 9:30 because if I don't, I'm going to be late. So some of you know what I mean. Either arrive an hour and a half early or be late. Mm-hmm. There's no betweens. Right. But anyway, I heard about them, and to me, the candidates were preaching a communistic doctrine right from start to finish. Yes.
Didn't one of them just, whenever he was asked a question, he spoke in Spanish?
And what?
Yeah,
Oh yeah, one of them did speak in. Yeah, that's it. Again, I did not watch him.
Yeah.
I didn't watch them, but I heard about him. Yeah, one of them did speak in Spanish. I guess maybe trying to get the votes of a certain kind of person. I don't know.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like that.
Yeah. So anyway, basically, I mean, they're actually promoting socialism. And you might ask, what's the difference between communism and socialism? Well, communism is more extreme. Communism is what the American Indians had. The word communism comes from the word commune. People live in villages. Socialism will allow you to have factories. Under socialism, the state owns the factories. So you still have your airplane factory, your steel mills, your coal mines, but the state would own them, and every worker would get paid the same, regardless of skill level. And if you think this would take away your incentive to better yourself, it's proven to be right. And if you get too much, the state is going to come in and take it from you and redistribute your wealth you get to the poorer people. And one of the candidates last night said, the rich ought to pay more of the taxes. And the Washington Post published an article this morning that the rich are paying about the upper 10% are paying about 85% of the taxes. This was just somewhere I may have seen this. My figures might be wrong, but this was in the Washington Post. In other words, did this particular candidate know what this candidate was talking about? But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, to me, folks, this is scary. Now, all of you who've been here remember, I had students walk out when I said this. A nation, when the government gets involved in helping the poor, that nation stands on the eve of destruction. Just ask the people of Venezuela. The government has no business being involved in taking care of the poor. Why not? Because they wind up, they take over. And they control every one of you, lock, stock, and barrel. They wind up telling you, you have to become a factory worker. You have to become a teacher. They telling you what you can and cannot do, among other things. Or telling you how much money you're allowed to keep of what you earn. Control you. And that's a lot easier to do, especially since most of our business transactions today are done where they call it. I mean, I do it myself. That way, the government has access to every bit of money that you spend and know where you spend it and how much.
Sure.
Very true. And then they can say at some point, hey, you really can't afford this, you can't have it. Hitler didn't have that ability. I mean, you know, and he had some machinery. He had nothing to compare with what we have today. All right.
Professor,
Yes.
there is something to this cashless society. There's more to it than
Yes.
people realize.
Oh, yeah.
And then even with Facebook and how, even with, this may be off subject, but even with Facebook, my husband was listening to, I guess there was a gentleman who, for lack of a better word, let's say he was one of the founding partners or whatever. And so he no longer, whoever this gentleman was no longer working at Facebook, but he talked about the algorithms or something like that they put in, and they put, I don't know how to explain it. It has something to do with like dopamine or something in there. Whatever this is, it was created intentionally. That's what get people hooked to it. When it was created, it was something that was intentionally done to get us addicted to being on Facebook, because it can become that. But the point I'm trying to make is all of this stuff is leading to something, and what happens is that sometimes we don't understand the undercurrents or what's really going on behind the scenes, or what we're getting reeled into. There's more.
Ultimately, I mean, are you aware? I mean, I've been told, if you carry one on, mine is off right now because I'm teaching a class. I've been told that the government knows where you are through this. Now, I see a few heads nodding. I mean, now you might try to argue, well, maybe it's not so, but this device has a GPS. And it's not only, well, okay, now I delivered for Uber for a while, and the customer knew where I was located.
I mean, not to live in fear, but we do need to be informed.
But be informed,
and not be ignorant, or our heads buried in the sand.
Well, some of these things do have an addictive quality. As for Facebook, let me tell you, I stayed off of it for a whole year, but then when my daughter is in the process of moving to Orlando, and we keep up with each other that way, it's a cheap way of, see, also it's not like when I'm calling her, I stop her from what she's doing, but if I simply send her a Facebook message, she reads it when it's convenient for her, you know.
Sure.
It's a good way to communicate.
Sure.
And at the same time, is it sinister? And does it promote and push doctrines that are going to destroy us down the road? All right. Anyway, all right. Folk, the idea of taking wealth from the rich and just giving it to the poor is nothing less bad than stealing. Now, I'm not talking about, for instance, now Walt Disney got rich. How did he get rich? He created a character called Mickey Mouse. And he got millions of dollars. And they used to build a theme park. He helped the poor not by giving them a handout, but by expecting a service from them, which in turn helped him get richer and helped them get richer too. I'm using Disney because, you know, my daughter wants to work at Disney World. She's worked there 3 times. So I'm going to help her move on July 3rd of next week. I'm going to help her move down to Orlando, where she hopes to work for Disney for the 4th time. She might not, but she hopes to work for Disney. But again, I'm fascinated with Disney. I mean, I tell her, hey, I like Disneyland, Disney World. My wife's going along, and you know, and we've been there several times already. And she gets us in for free. If she works there, she gets us in for free. And that's a big boon because my favorite part's the animal kingdom. Anyway, yes.
Wasn't Walt Disney like a huge anti-Semite?
Unfortunately, when you look at any human being, we all of us, and that includes, I'm afraid, me, have some serious, serious flaw about us. Now, Henry Ford, I mean, you know, I talk about how he paid his workers more than anybody else. That sounds great, but he worked them like slaves. Yes. Sorry. I hate to say it, but it's there. I mean, Martin Luther was an anti-Semite himself. I mean, I mentioned that when we on our first lesson, if you remember. Yes. And my wife is part Jewish. I hate anti-Semitism. So, but nevertheless, I mean, but if you look at people, you have heroes when you're young, and then you start studying your heroes more and more. And after a while, you get to where you don't have any heroes anymore. I mean, but then you have to, I mean, okay. We're getting to where in our country we want to take certain statues down because these people were slave owners. I say, but then again, look at the people on the other side. Some of them had serious moral flaws themselves. We all do. We're all flawed. And we have to live together and somehow find a way to work together. With me with my flaws, each of us with our own flaws, and some of the flaws are serious. Glad you brought that up, though. Okay, anyway, Karl Marx. Again, I'm spending a lot of time talking about because of the reason, folk, he became very, very important as time went on. Now, he believed that the working class was a proletariat. I'll take back some stuff about the working class was a proletariat. The bourgeoisie were the upper class. Okay, I'll stand corrected. I corrected myself here. But now, he was against all religion, but he said himself that he said, I could not have done it without Darwin. In other words, Darwin supplied the means by which life could appear, a universe could appear, without any kind of divine intervention. The universe could create itself and put itself together, and eventually a bunch of molecules would put themselves together and form human beings without any kind of a creator whatever. Where's me some soap where I can wash out my mouth now, having uttered that stuff. But anyway, maybe you believe that yourself. I don't. But Karl Marx said he could not have done it without Darwin. And Marxism is associated with a lack of any kind of theology, a disbelief in Christianity. Morality was a matter of supporting the cause, and anything you do to support the cause, it was okay to lie, to cheat, to steal, to murder, any way at all you could do to support the cause. Marx helped form the first labor unions, and this is what was one of the things that given unions a bad name. I was a member of a union for a while when I was at Lockheed, and I still get the union paper, even though I've been gone from there 11 years. But I get the union paper. Unions tend to be socialistic. Socialism, though, became communism was extreme, so socialism began to form, and today in the modern world socialism has taken over much of Europe and much of Latin America, and a lot of countries that have tried it have abandoned it, or at least undercut it and undermined it. Margaret Thatcher did a lot to undo socialism in Great Britain. New Zealand tried it and abandoned it. Paraguay tried it and largely abandoned it. One thing that communism could not overcome was nationalism. Nationalism was, I'm an Austrian and I'm pro-Austria, right or wrong, or I'm an American and I'm for my country, right or wrong. And this kept Austrian and American socialists from joining together into one cause. Marx figured that someday all the workers of the world, whether they be Canadian, British, French, German, Italian, Chinese, all the workers of the world would someday unite and overthrow all the upper classes and destroy the nobility. And when that happened, peace on earth would come about and heaven on earth would result. And we'd all go back to living in caves and tribes and living an average of 18 years. You have to have your specialist folk. You have to have your people who specialize as doctors, people who specialize as engineers. Otherwise, we all go back to tribal type living. All right. Labor unions were formed. Now, I'll say this about labor unions. I'm going to jump to the 2019. Today, most workers are not members of unions. Unions got a really bad name. For one thing, they encourage laziness. They were accused of encouraging laziness and lack of production. And management found a way to make all their workers salaried workers, who were not unionized. And the result is you don't have very many union workers anymore. But union workers are oftentimes highly paid and some of them were non-productive. Nevertheless, back to this time period, workers were given the right to strike eventually. The strikes, in the long run, the strikes did help. Now, anyone can tell you that when you miss 8 or 10 weeks of work for a strike, you never gain it back. No, but the people who come after you do. In other words, I was a union worker, and I benefited not from what I did, but from what my parents' generation did, my grandparents, or great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, what they did benefited me, not them. So the unions did benefit future generations. As cities got larger, thanks to the invention of structural steel and apartments could be taller, people began to realize they had to have sanitation, so public health was set up, sewers were constructed, they began to pump clean, fresh water into the cities. They found ways to clean up the water, filtration, settling, even boiling in some cases. Life expectancy was increased, public health improved. Building codes made it difficult for people to build substandard housing. Building codes meant you inspected. Now, I'll say this about building codes. About the time I was getting married, a big earthquake occurred in Armenia, when Armenia was still part of the Soviet Union. And they discovered that those buildings in Armenia that fell apart and crumbled, they were made of exclusively of concrete with no steel to reinforce the concrete. Now, in America, they could not, no builder could get away with that. In other words, you can build a steel structure and then put concrete to protect the steel from rusting, but you have to have steel in the middle of it. Yes?
Due to, like, I know we're talking about regulations that started to improve America back then, but now something that kind of has caught my eye from an old history class that I took. What do you think about the needs for the infrastructure to be, kind of reformed?
You brought up a really, really serious issue. This country and most of the rest of the civilized world, a lot of the infrastructure was built in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and it's in an advanced state of decay. And we had a bridge collapse in Wisconsin, was built in 1957, and it simply fell down under old age. Now, of course, I'm talking about the Armenian earthquake that exposed the fact that the Russians were building buildings of concrete only with no structural steel. The result was the earthquake just killed 50,000 people. Just devastating. That wouldn't, people would not have died as much in our country because we have a building code. Building codes are essential, but now as far as infrastructure, that's another issue, and it's a serious one. It could employ a lot of folk. It could. But where's the money coming from? We're gonna have to stop giving money where we don't need to and put it where we need to.
Like, remember that one time when Pizza Hut was actually fixing roads?
What's that?
Pizza Hut was
Yeah.
actually fixing roads.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, oh yeah. Hey, I used to pay 50 cents for a banana split.